Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and you may recall that a little while ago I said I would do a review of the first issue of Godzilla vs. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, but unfortunately I didn't make it to the comic book store in time. They never got back to me about reordering that first issue. I eventually just waited until the whole thing was collected in a trade. But no way was I going to make that mistake again when it came to Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong. This time I got to the store just in time. In time, in fact, to get 2 of the variant covers. And, well, now I'm here to just share my brief thoughts on how this comic started off, because it is only issue 1. Though before I get to that, I just wanted to comment about why I think this crossover exists. I mean, obviously I know why it exists. It's cross-promotion. They're taking 2 things that are under the Warner Brothers banner, in this case the DC Universe and the Monsterverse, and they're putting them together as a way to expose each thing to the other respective fandoms. If you're not a DC fan but you are a Godzilla fan, you'll be drawn in to get a DC comic. If you're a DC fan but not necessarily a Monsterverse fan, you might be inclined to check out the Monsterverse after reading this. That's the basic idea, but it did dawn on me that there's a little something more to it than that. See, I've been looking at how things have been going in terms of the pop culture, and what I have observed is that, generally speaking, Godzilla's actually doing pretty well recently. He's carved out quite a niche for himself in the popular zeitgeist, particularly stateside. I mean, think about it. There are 2 theatrical movies that are going to be released within months of each other that are about Godzilla, plus a 24-hour streaming channel on Pluto that's completely free, plus the American Godzilla store that makes all of the merchandise available without needing to pay an exorbitant shipping fee, plus all of the Playmates figures, plus these comics and the other prequel comics and the IDW comics. I mean, if you really look at it, Godzilla may not necessarily have gone full mainstream yet, but he's doing pretty well for himself. But if you look at DC by contrast, well, comic book sales in general have been in the toilet for a while now, but superheroes as a genre also are clearly on the out. They are not doing well. It started in 2022, but it was confirmed in 2023 that we may have reached the point where the bubble is bursting. Of all the comic book movies that were released this year, only 2 of them have actually done well. One of which was an animated movie, the other of which was the end of a trilogy, and both of those were from Marvel. You want to see how DC is doing? It's not doing well at all, really. It's released flop after flop after flop, and looks like it's going to release at least 1 more flop before the year is out. And now there's a reboot that's coming, which is in a state of uncertainty. And yeah, it's just not doing well. And when I look at all of that, I realized something. Godzilla doesn't need to cross over with DC, but DC needs to cross over with Godzilla. I actually do think that is what it's all about. I mean, think about it. We know that ever since AT&T bought Time Warner, the new studio heads have wanted DC to be the cash cow. That hasn't been panning out. But Godzilla hasn't been doing too bad for himself, and they technically own a version of Godzilla. Yes, I know Legendary and all that, but you may notice that even though Legendary has split off from Warner Brothers multiple times, Godzilla has always remained at that studio. So They are clearly more than just distributors for that. So whereas a few years ago, anyone would have said that kaiju movies were a risk and superhero movies were the safe bet, now it's looking more like the opposite is true, where kaiju are getting more attention and superheroes are turning out to be not so popular. They're at least waning. And DC in particular is in dire straits. So I think that in the hopes of boosting DC, they're essentially using the monsterverse to that end. In fact, I'm specifically thinking that they're using Godzilla to that end because Godzilla is the one that's getting featured the most in promotions. Here are the various variant covers, aside from the two I showed you at the beginning. You may notice that some of them don't feature Kong. Kong is in the book, of course. He's going to be a major player. But don't you think it's curious that he's not on every single cover, even though his name is in the title? And of course, when it comes to the content of the books themselves, the primary focus has been on pitting Godzilla against Superman. That's the specific thing. Or if it's not Godzilla going up against Superman, it's Godzilla going up against a giant Batman mecha, or Godzilla going up against the whole Justice League. That seems to be the draw here. So, yeah, like I said, this isn't something they're doing to promote Godzilla. I think it's something they're doing to promote DC, but they know that in order to do that, they kind of need to stand on Godzilla's shoulders, because right now Godzilla's doing better than them. I mean, granted, lots of things from Japan are doing better than American comics right now, so that's not necessarily something that's exclusive to Godzilla. But yeah, I just wanted to get that out there. On to the content of the book itself. So what you gotta understand up front is that this particular issue is only the first issue. It exists to set things up. It is the first chapter. There's not necessarily going to be that much that happens in it, and it's not necessarily going to do the most spectacular thing right off the bat. However, that's not to say the comic doesn't have anything happen in it. It kind of starts in media res with the big tease of Godzilla showing up in Metropolis at, of all times, the moment Clark is about to propose to Lois Lane, but then it jumps back a few hours to show how we got here. And basically the issue's main purpose is to explain how creatures from the Monsterverse wound up in the DC universe. And it's pretty simple, actually. The Injustice League gets transported to the Monsterverse when one of their plans gets botched, and Toyman, sick of being treated like an idiot by the others, uses that stone from Wonder Woman 1984, at least I'm pretty sure that's what it is because it works the same way, to essentially wish the monsters there, because he's the only one who thinks that if they brought the monsters back to the DC universe and just sort of unleashed them on Metropolis and Gotham and all the major cities, that would be the ultimate way to get rid of the Justice League. No one else believes him, of course, but, you know, we kaiju fans, we know that's an effective strategy, right? Now, since that's the case, what you need to understand going in, if you're a Godzilla fan, is that this is very much a DC-focused issue. Not that the Monsterverse creatures aren't in it, but the focus is predominantly on the DC characters, establishing where all the different characters are at, particularly Superman, as this is supposed to be a major point in his life, and the Monsterverse Titans are going to come into that. As such, those Titans don't exactly get the most attention. Obviously, there's a lot of setup for Superman fighting Godzilla. There is a moment where we see Kong, and Gorilla Grodd actually tries forming a bond with him because he's in awe to see that there's an ape god suddenly before him. But other than that, it's keeping things relatively toned down and focusing predominantly on the superheroes. Now, if that's a deal breaker for you, then you might not want to read this series, because I have a feeling that's going to be the primary focus. But I happen to be someone who is a fan of both DC and Godzilla. Yeah, I like the DC heroes, so that alone isn't a deal breaker. Something else worth noting is that similar to the Godzilla vs. Power Rangers crossover, it doesn't seem to be tied to any specific continuity, at least on the comic book side. Obviously, the Godzilla side of things is specifically the monsterverse. We're not exactly sure when it's supposed to take place, although Skull Island still exists, so maybe that's a continuity error, or maybe it's supposed to take place between King of the Monsters and GVK, or maybe the Monsterverse has multiverse fractured segments of its own, who knows. On the DC side of things, it does kind of assume you have a basic understanding of the DC universe, but it's not necessarily tied down to any previous continuity. There are certain things like how Clark is proposing to Lois rather than being together with her and having a kid, which tells me it's not part of either the New 52 or Rebirth or anything like that. The characters appear to mostly have their classic outfits. Hawkgirl is a member of the Justice League like in the animated series, and the Fortress of Solitude looks like it does in the Richard Donner movie. So it's clearly meant to be a sort of generalized DC universe. One that, again, assumes a level of familiarity, but isn't necessarily telling you that you have to read 100 issues of Action Comics in order to understand it. Most of the characters' focus is on the fact that Clark is about to propose to Lois, which is a big deal. And we see different lines being drawn where characters like Wonder Woman are really happy for Clark, characters like Green Lantern are not so sure. So it's not like we're getting a lot of rich character development in just this one issue, and we actually spend quite a bit of time with the villains in this case, because, well, they are the ones that are going to get the main plot rolling. And there is an interesting contrast between the Justice League and the Injustice League, where we clearly see that the Justice League is comprised of multiple different types of personalities, where they each have their own particular views on certain things, like Clark's proposal, and some of them aren't seeing eye to eye with the others, and yet they still are a unified front, they still get along, they're still focused on the common goal of saving the world. Whereas the Injustice League are constantly bickering, they can't agree on a single thing to save their lives, and when they attempt a plan, it gets botched because at least one of them isn't playing along at any given moment. So, interesting little dichotomy between the two. It does a good job of showing that there is a clear distinction between the heroes and the villains, which is something that a lot of modern comics have been sorely lacking these days. So that was actually kind of refreshing. It was actually nice to see that the heroes are heroes, the villains are villains, the heroes are people that provide a good sense of role modelship, if you will. They show us that even people who are different can get along, whereas the Injustice League are the villains who have their own viewpoints and each one thinks they're right and they cannot get along with the others, even though supposedly they're trying to, even though they have that common goal of wanting to defeat the good guys. So I can at least get behind that. One thing that stood out to me as kind of weird, and I suppose I would say it's something I didn't like about the story, is that Hal Jordan, at least I'm pretty sure it's Hal Jordan, it looks like him, he's kind of a jerk in this comic. Like, he seems very dour and not very optimistic, doesn't seem like he has any sense of fun about him. He's vocally opposed to Superman settling down and starting a family with Lois for some reason that's never really specified. I mean, it's not like it was his girlfriend that wound up in the refrigerator, but, or was it? I think that was Kyle Rayner. But anyway, for some reason, Hal Jordan is just depicted as not a very likable character. And I don't know why that was done. I mean, it just felt weird. I'm familiar enough with the Green Lantern series to know what Hal Jordan is usually like, and he's not usually like that. So I don't think they're necessarily going to give a reason for it, but yeah, I hope they tone it down a little in the books that follow. I mean, for crying out loud, he actually asks what the point is of being a hero if there's not enough time to stop every single wrongdoing or mishap. Although this does give the Flash a chance to shine, as he says it's not about having all the time in the world to stop everything, it's about using the time you have to do what you can. Which, again, that is a very hero thing to say, and I'm again very happy to see that sort of thing pop up in one of these comics. Okay, so bottom line, is this series off to a good start? Well, it's not off to a bad start if you ask me. Like I said, this is the setup chapter, and as setup, it does its job by getting the ball rolling. It explains how these two universes are going to come together. It ends by promising an epic battle, and that's about all it really does. So, from here, it could go anywhere. From here, it could skyrocket and become one of the most amazing crossovers ever. It could take a nosedive and just be a cheap knockoff whatever that nobody likes. It could be somewhere in the middle. All this first issue is just to make sure that the story begins. And begin it does. We will really have more to say about if the story is quality once we get to issue 2, because that's where things are actually going to start happening in earnest. But that's not coming out until November, so we got some time to just sort of digest this first issue and wait. But I will say though, this cover right here with all of the DC heroes charging at Godzilla, or at least as many as they could fit, with the title just sort of down here so it doesn't get in the way, that's beautiful right there. This is getting framed. No doubt about that. And now that means I have to go find a frame. So until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.